All right, folks, tonight we're diving deep into the medieval world, a time of castles, crusades, and chivalry. Picture a world where towering stone fortresses dominate the landscape and the clang of swords echoes through the air. It's a time that has fascinated us for centuries, filled with tales of heroism and adventure. Think Game of Thrones, but with worse plumbing. Seriously, the medieval period wasn't all glamour and glory. Everyday life was tough, and the living conditions were far from luxurious. Imagine dealing with the lack of modern amenities we take for granted today. Now, when you hear chivalry, you might picture brave knights rescuing damsels, slaying dragons, and generally being all-around stand-up guys. These stories have been romanticized over the years, creating an image of knights as the ultimate heroes of their time. And while that's partially true, it's like saying politicians always tell the truth. The reality was often much more complex and less glamorous. Knights were human, after all, with their own set of flaws and challenges. There's a bit more to the story. Beyond the tales of valor and honor, knights had to undergo rigorous training and adhere to a strict set of rules. Their lives were governed by a code that dictated their actions both on and off the battlefield. In reality, knights were more like the medieval version of fighter pilots. They got all the glory, the fancy gear, and probably had a pretty sweet time when they weren't, off fighting wars. They were the rock stars of their era, admired and envied by many. But behind all that shiny armor was a strict code of conduct, a sort of bro code for the heavily armed and emotionally constipated. This code was known as chivalry, and it was more than just a set of guidelines, it was a way of life. This, my friends, was chivalry. It was a complex and multifaceted concept that shaped the lives of knights and influenced the society around them. So let's dive deeper and uncover the true essence of what it meant to be a knight in shining armor. So, what did this ancient guide to being awesome entail? Well, imagine a cross between a self-help book and a really intense Boy Scout manual. First and foremost, knights were supposed to be courageous in battle. That one's pretty straightforward. You've got a lance and a horse, so you'd better be ready to use them. Next up, loyalty. Knights pledged their allegiance to their king or lord, which basically meant doing whatever they were told, no matter how ridiculous. Think of it as medieval management with more swords and fewer emails. Then there was honor, a big one. This meant fighting fairly, most of the time, keeping your word unless it was inconvenient, and generally not being a jerk unless you really felt like it. Easy, right? Of course, no discussion of chivalry would be complete without mentioning the ladies. Knights were expected to be courteous and protective of women, especially those of noble birth. This was the whole knight in shining armor thing, swooping in to save damsels in distress. Now, while rescuing a princess from a dragon sounds pretty heroic, it's important to remember that these were the same guys who thought bathing once a year was a good idea. So maybe their idea of romance wasn't exactly what we'd call woke today, and let's be real, historical accuracy is important here. Knights weren't always out there battling mythical beasts. More often they were fighting other knights, arguing over land or, pillaging villages. So much for chivalry. Speaking of romance, medieval chivalry gave us the concept of courtly love. This wasn't your average Tinder date, folks. It involved a knight worshipping a lady from afar, composing poems, singing songs, and generally making a complete fool of himself. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of sliding into someone's DMs, but instead of emojis, they used sonnets about their undying love and devotion. The catch? This courtly love was often unrequited. The lady in question was usually already married, often to the knight's lord, which made the whole thing a bit awkward to say the least. So we've talked about the ideals, but how did chivalry actually play out in the real world? The concept of chivalry was supposed to be a code of conduct for knights, emphasizing virtues like bravery, courtesy, honor, and gallantry toward women. But the reality was often far from the ideal. Well, imagine a bunch of teenagers trying to follow a set of rules written by their parents. These young squires and knights in training were expected to uphold these lofty standards, but they were still just kids trying to figure things out. Yeah, it didn't always go according to plan. The battlefield was chaotic, and the pressure to perform often led to mistakes and blunders. Take, for example, the 100 Years' War. This prolonged conflict between England and France saw countless battles where the chivalric code was more of a suggestion than a rule. It wasn't exactly a shining example of chivalry. The aftermath of these battles often left the landscape scarred and the people devastated. You had knights slaughtering each other, burning villages, and generally not behaving very knightly at all. The brutality of war often overshadowed any attempts at honourable conduct. Kind of makes you wonder if they even read the handbook. The rules of chivalry seemed more like an afterthought in the heat of battle. And then there were the tournaments. These events were designed to be a showcase of knightly skills and chivalrous behaviour. These were supposed to be chivalrous competitions where knights could show off their skills. They were meant to be controlled environments where the ideals of chivalry could be practiced. In reality, they were more like medieval demolition derbies, with knights trying to knock each other off their horses with giant sticks. The violence and competitiveness often overshadowed the chivalric ideals. Safety regulations? What safety regulations? The lack of proper safety measures often led to serious injuries and even fatalities, making these tournaments far more dangerous than they were intended to be. So what about chivalry today? Is it just a relic of the past, or does it still have a place in our fast-paced modern lives? Does it even exist in our modern world of smartphones, social media and reality TV? In a time where instant gratification is the norm, can the slow, deliberate acts of chivalry survive? Well, you won't find many knights riding around in shining armor these days unless it's Comic-Con, but the spirit of chivalry isn't entirely lost. The ideals of chivalry, while a bit outdated, aren't entirely irrelevant. Acts of kindness and respect still resonate deeply with us. Sure, holding the door for someone might seem like a small gesture, or offering your seat on the bus might not seem like a grand act, but it's the thought that counts, right? These small acts of kindness can make someone's day, even if they don't involve slaying a dragon. It's the thought that counts, and these gestures show that we care about others. But let's be honest, chivalry today often looks more like a dude trying to impress a date by eating a whole ghost pepper on YouTube. It's a different kind of bravery, but bravery nonetheless. It's the thought that counts, and the effort to impress or show care is still there, but sometimes the execution leaves a lot to be desired. Whether it's a grand gesture or a small act of kindness, chivalry in any form is about showing respect and care for others. In conclusion, knights, we salute you, sort of. So, there you have it, folks. Chivalry, a glorious, messy, and often hilarious contradiction. Were knights perfect paragons of virtue? Not even close. But they did give us some entertaining stories, impressive armor, and, hey, maybe even a few ideals worth salvaging. Just remember, next time someone tries to impress you with their chivalry, take it with a grain of salt, maybe a whole shaker.